Hey, greetings everyone. It is GleeCon. Happy to be back with you one more time on another episode of Lore of Warcraft. We get in it. It's been rare lately. We used to do this all the time. There have been days when I've done 10 episodes in one day, but it's been rare lately that I've been doing more than one. So we're doing it two for one today, especially since it's going to be a shorter one. On the last episode we just did earlier, we took our Tauren shaman on the Call of Water. Really, we just walked back and forth. Eastern Kingdoms, Kalimdor, Eastern Kingdoms, Kalimdor. Died a few times. I think I maybe fought 3 or mobs or something like that, just that I felt like I could get to. Still didn't quite finish it. It sounds like we've got 1 or 2 steps left where I'm going to have to go back to the Eastern Kingdoms yet again, and then by then I decided to call it quits so that the Hearthstone would be able to cut some time off of that journey next time we play. I also have been reading to you guys the last Dungeons and Dragons source book called Dark Factions, and we are reading about said factions right now in the main meatiest chapter of the book called Factions. Last time we read this book, we read about the Argent Dawn, so stay a while and listen as we read the next one, the Atal'ai and Hakkari. These should be some troll factions. The Hakkari, I believe, are the ones that worship Hakkar, and the Atal'ai, let's find out. Okay, so it says the membership of these groups is unknown, perhaps 200. I feel like there's more than 200 mobs in certain spots in BFA. They are chaotic evil, for sure. At the moment, the Atal'ai and Hakkari's influence is limited to 2 locations, Zul'Grub and the Temple of Hakkar, devoted to Hakkar or in honor of Hakkar. There are much... Now, as a BFA, there are much other greater areas of influence in the Swamp of Sorrows. However, if they have their way, the whole of Azeroth could be in danger. The Atal'ai and Hakkari serve the evil god Hakkar the Soulflayer, whom they recently summoned to Azeroth. The Atal'ai, which means devoted ones in Zendali, and Hakkari are 2 groups of evil troll priests who seek to reincarnate their master, the god Hakkar. Recently, the trolls summoned their god to Azeroth. He dwells in Zul'Grub, where his power builds. Many trolls follow him. The Atal'ai are his most favored servants. Their members are primarily jungle trolls, as these were the ones who originally revealed Hakkar a millennia ago. Let's read about the history of these groups. Once in ancient times, before the Kaldera'i and the War of the Ancients, 2 great troll empires existed, the Gurubashi and the Amani. The Sundering, as one might imagine, crippled their civilizations. The ages following the Sundering were dark ones, and the Gurubashi trolls prayed to their pantheon of primitive gods to help them. Eventually, one of these gods, Hakkar the Soulflayer, answered their prayers. Hakkar was the darkest of the trolls' gods, though they did not yet realize how dark he was. Hakkar has a couple appellations, and neither of them inspires warmth in this dwarf's heart. At times he's called the Soulflayer, and at other times he is the Blood God. In return for his help, the specifics of which remain vague in the histories I heard, he demanded sacrifices of living intelligent creatures, of trolls in fact, if what I'm given to understand is true. As time went on, Hakkar demanded more and more sacrifices. Eventually, the Hakkari, Hakkar's priesthood, slaughtered their people every day to sate the blood god's mad thirst. Finally, Hakkar demanded that the trolls discover a way to summon him to Azeroth. He dreamed of consuming all the souls in the world. At this time, the Gurubashi realized the truth about the god who vowed to help them. Even the... I lost my spot. Hakkari realized the depth of his hunger. It could not be sated. The Gurubashi and the Hakkari renounced the Soulflayer. However, by this time it was almost too late. The Atal'ai, an extremist faction of the Hakkari, remained loyal to Hakkar and resolved to bring him to Azeroth. While they were unable to summon Hakkar himself, a physical avatar of the god was manifest in Zul'Grub. You can be sure that wasn't a pretty thing. The trolls speak of the subsequent conflict only in whispers. Troll fought troll as the Gurubashi and Hakkari clashed with the Atal'ai, attempting to rid Hakkar's taint from their civilization. It wasn't an easy fight. The war ravaged Zul'Grub, and even the Zandalar tribe entered the conflict. Yet eventually the Gurubashi and Hakkari emerged triumphant. They destroyed Hakkar's avatar, they hunted the Atal'ai, slaying them and sending a few scattering into the wilderness. The Gurubashi then turned on the Hakkari. Though the priests had helped the Gurubashi against Hakkar, the other trolls blamed them as being partly responsible for the events that culminated in the civil war. That's true. The Gurubashi were merciless. Hakkari died by the handful. Some of them managed to escape their fellows' wrath and fled into the jungle. The escaped Hakkari were desperate. They could not return to Zul'Grub. They could turn only to one place. We had a couple typos there that I read through. The Hakkari tracked the Atal'ai, who had also fled Zul'Grub at the end of the war. Eventually, they located the Atal'ai in the Swamp of Sorrows, where they had secretly built a new temple to their god, the Temple of Hakkar, where they continued their efforts at summoning Hakkar to Azeroth. The Atal'ai had also supplemented their numbers with undead Atal'ai. Hakkar was pleased with the Atal'ai despite their failure and taught them even more dark secrets, including necromancy. In a series of daring raids, the Atal'ai had returned to Zul'Grub and reclaimed the bodies of their fellows. That's the second time in a row they've called it Zul'Grub. Hey y'all, going back to Zul'Grub, wanna come? The Hakkari came to the Atal'ai and pledged their service to Hakkar. They spoke of their persecution at the hands of the Gurubashi. The Atal'ai were pleased that the Hakkari had suffered and allowed them into the temple. However, because the Atal'ai had remained devoted to Hakkar throughout the conflict, Hakkar regarded the Atal'ai with more favor, as he has done ever since. The Atal'ai and Hakkari then bent their efforts towards summoning Hakkar. The Gurubashi didn't attempt to track the surviving priests. More is the pity, they had other problems. Zul'Grub was devastated and many trolls had died. They didn't have the resources to scour the wilderness for Atal'ai and Hakkari who might be able to survive in the hostile jungle, so the Gurubashi did not impede the Atal'ai and Hakkari's progress. That task fell to another. The green dragon aspect Ysera learned of the trolls' plan and smashed Hakkar to the bottom of the swamp beneath the Pool of Tears. For 1,000 years before we knew what it truly was, most races referred to this ruin as the Sunken Temple. Ysera then posted several green dragons to guard the temple and make sure the troll priests didn't attempt their tricks again. Several dragons entered the temple to drive out or slay the trolls, but a powerful and insidious corruption from the Emerald Dream began to affect the green dragons. It quickly claimed them all, even Aranicus, the great dragon charged with the temple's safety. I'm pretty sure you can get like a trinket or something that is the something of Aranicus. With the dragons maddened and addled, the Atal'ai and Hakkari continued their progress unimpeded. They had to be careful of stepping outside, though, because a number of uncorrupt green dragons patrolled the area and still do. And so it was for many years. Recently, however, the Atal'ai and Hakkari discovered a piece of crucial information. They could not summon Hakkar at the Sunken Temple because he could only be summoned at the Gurubashi's previous capital, Zul'Grub. A number of powerful Atal'ai and Hakkari priests left for Zul'Grub. Their plans bore fruit. Recently, spies entering Zul'Grub have confirmed a terrible presence. Hakkar the Soulflayer walks the world. Not only that, but Hakkar's priests have captured 5 Zandalari high priests. Those priests each revere a different god in the troll pantheon. Hakkar has these priests under his sway and is forcing them to channel power from their gods into him. So that actually takes us beyond, it's still classic stuff that we're talking about, but Zul'Grub is not a phase 1 thing that exists, so it's actually taking us a little bit further than where we are technically with greater lore overall. And it does give us some context, some background lore for when we do those instances on our own. The Atal'ai and Hakkari don't get along with anyone, but they clash particularly with their own people, the jungle trolls of the former Gurubashi Empire. The Zandalar tribe from their island home in the South Seas is especially concerned with the Atal'ai and Hakkari's plans. Catching wind of what their evil brethren planned, a group of Zandalar trolls set sail for the mainland. With their people scattered and occupied with other dangers, the Zandalari are forced to recruit adventurers from both the Alliance and Horde, independent factions, to strike against Hakkar and his priests on their behalf. So yeah, back then, before BFA, Zandalar trolls were a neutral faction, and you can get rep with them in Classic. That changes pretty quickly. I'm pretty sure those raids, maybe even as soon as Burning Crusade, get kind of smashed and thrown away. The Atal'ai and Hakkari's relationship with the Gurubashi trolls have improved recently. With Hakkar now in existence, the Gurubashi scramble to appease him. They defend his temple and his priests, hoping he will reward them. Yeah, this has been very poorly edited, this section. Hakkar is an evil and ravenous god. He poses a dire threat to the world. Once Hakkar decides to move, his priest's first step may be to crush the Zandalar tribe. The Zandalari are the oldest threats to Hakkar and his priests because of their knowledge. They can tell other races important details about Hakkar and the priests who follow him, and they actively recruit heroes to combat Hakkar. After taking care of the Zandalari, Hakkar and his followers will likely go on to destroy the other jungle trolls of Stranglethorn Vale and offer their souls to the Blood God. With the Atal'ai Supreme and Hakkar manifest, it will be a dark day for the rest of the world, so I say we work with the Zandalari and take out Hakkar and his priests before they take us out. A single leader holds sway over the priesthood. This is the prophet Jamalan. He rules the Atal'ai and Hakkari and is an instrument in attempts to summon the Soul Flayer. The Atal'ai are still based in the Temple of Hakkar, which they guard fervently. A few of them also dwell in Zul Grub in the physical presence of their god. They rarely venture far from the Swamp of Sorrows, though their artifacts can occasionally be found scattered about the jungle and the Pool of Tears. And let's read a little sidebar about heroes and the Hakkari. The Hakkari accept only jungle trolls into their ranks, and they don't accept many. A campaign in which the players control members of the Hakkari would be an interesting one, but probably not good for more than a few sessions. The heroes, or villains, would undoubtedly be evil, as they serve a primitive and bloodthirsty god, and evil PCs do not make for good extended campaigns. As Hakkari, the heroes defend their temple from invading adventurers from the Horde and Alliance. Jamalan or another member of the Atal'ai may ask them to gather artifacts or information from the larger world, perhaps from Zandalar, where many ancient troll artifacts lie. They may also hunt down exiles or enemies who may prove a nuisance in the future. If they're powerful enough, Hakkar may summon them to his presence and give them special assignments. Okay, so let's contextualize this sentence right here. Evil adventurers do not make good for extended campaign sessions. I disagree. Why not? Role-playing an evil character is just that. It's role-playing. Sure. Is it weird, and does it bring in some potential moral implications for long-term role-playing amoral characters? Sure. But is it inherently evil in its own right or problematic? I don't necessarily think so. Now, what I meant by contextualizing it was, so like I've said on some previous episodes, I'm reading like about a history of where TSR was. And remember, this is coming out in the 90s. So in the 90s was a time period where TSR was majorly struggling. But in the 80s and early 90s, and I can actually remember this from my childhood, to age myself a little bit, Dungeons and Dragons was really demonized in the media, and there were like exposés on, I don't know, not maybe 60 Minutes or something to that effect, some kind of news show like that, where they really looked at the concept of Dungeons and Dragons causing people to commit suicide and causing them to worship demons. Of course, it was all BS, and anything that was like there was in one particular a boy that had gone missing, and he was a Dungeons and Dragons player, and so the private eye that investigated him really was convinced that he had joined a cult and had been sacrificed or was part of some evil things. It eventually was revealed that basically the private eye was crazy, and all of his theories were completely wacko, and the kid just suffered with depression, and he committed suicide like out in the woods, and they eventually found his body, and it was all a scam. But that didn't stick. That was kind of like a footnote, like, oh, boy found. Turns out had nothing to do with Dungeons and Dragons. What stuck in the sort of zeitgeist of the 80s and 90s was that Dungeons and Dragons was kind of similar to like a Ouija board, where it was a bad thing, and there were characters like assassins, and that you could summon demons and stuff like that. So by the time World of Warcraft came out, I think that was really starting to die down. So it was, but Dungeons and Dragons really still labored under the mantle of, they were a target in the media. Video games were a target in the media too, but video games never had to, they were fine. They survived despite it, and there's nothing you could do to stop people from playing video games. It was a losing battle. It was never going to go away. And then as more and more obviously non-evil games, if your mom is playing Candy Crush or whatever, then it's hard for that same person to go on a crusade against video games in general. And that's all I think has happened as people have aged. More and more people that are in positions of power have experience with or know people who are gamers, and it makes that sort of crusade fall by the wayside. But Dungeons and Dragons does not have and has not have. Sure, it's a lot more mainstream now, but it's still nowhere on that level. And at the same time, TSR, the company that made Dungeons and Dragons back then, had made a ton of horrible business decisions, and so they were a failing business. So one of the things that they did during this time period was they got rid of assassins and demon summoning and devils from their rule book. So when they created a second edition of Dungeons and Dragons, and remember, we're only in third edition right here, so they got rid of all that. You couldn't be an assassin. There were no demons. There were no devils, in an attempt to appease the sort of crazed Karens of the world back then. And so I think this is why they're saying, let's maybe not make an evil campaign. Whereas nowadays, who cares? All right, that was enough of my flavor commentary. Let's wrap this up with the members. The Atal'ai do not accept new members. The Hakkari do, but they gain few new members, which shouldn't be surprising. However, young troll priests who show proper dedication to both Hakkar and Jamalan's prophecy of immortality, and we're going to look at a sidebar on Jamalan in a second, they may find a place within the Hakkari, though the more senior priests watch them closely. Although they've succeeded in summoning Hakkar, the Hakkari remain wary. They are particularly aware that the Zandalari may try to sneak covert operatives into their organization to disrupt events. The average Atal'ai or Hakkari priest is of some ability, 9th to 13th level, who reveres Hakkar and follows Jamalan with a conviction bordering on, easily crossing over into fanaticism. They defend their temples to the death, for the time of their supremacy is upon them. Here's that sidebar on the only leader in the organization, Jamalan the Prophet, a male jungle troll. Jamalan is a mysterious individual who is mostly responsible for the cult's recent success in summoning Hakkar. By all accounts, Jamalan is a power-mad zealot prone to devouring, or if he's feeling pleasantly full, exiling trolls who disagree with him. Jamalan has recently received a series of visions in which Hakkar states that when he enters Azeroth, he will grant immortality to all Atal'ai. I note that he made no such promise to the Hakkari, who serve him, hoping that he'll grant them some reward despite his lack of a promise. All members of the Atal'ai believe this prophecy, or at least pretend to, which makes them all the more ferocious. However, I note that Hakkar is here now, and the Atal'ai are not immortal. The trolls think he's busy with other concerns, like draining other troll gods of their power, and hasn't got around to granting immortality yet. If you ask me, though, and if you ask some former members of the Atal'ai, these promises are a load of hooey. They were a ruse to trick Jamalan into bringing about his own doom and that of the rest of the world. And there are two adventure hooks. Captive Zandalari high priests are channeling power from their gods into Hakkar. Most believe the only way to stop this process is to kill the high priests. One Zandalari, however, believes he can disrupt this process by conducting a special ceremony. However, he must conduct this ceremony in a location currently holding a Night Elf town. An enterprising goblin sneaks into the temple of Atal, Hakkar, and Zul'Grub and appropriates many of the Atal'ai's relics. He peddles his wares throughout the Eastern Kingdoms, claiming that anyone can use these items to gain a portion of Hakkar's power. He's lying, of course, but not everyone knows that. Okay. Interesting stuff. A lot of it we had talked about before, but I do think it was a cool little way, and you can see that next time we'll do the Cenarian Circle. All right, we have another episode in pipe, 5x5. Thank you, everyone, loyal watchers and new watchers alike. I'll see you next time on the next episode of Lore of Warcraft.